we'll just kind of get rolling, and they can come in whenever they're ready. So if you don't know me, my name is Robert. I teach in the undergraduate architecture department at Pratt, and I'm part of the Resilience, Wellness, and Wellbeing Council. And this is kind of a fun project coming out of that to just explore some of these creative acts through drawing that we do as a more interface into mindfulness and attention. I always like to start each session with a bit of a warm-up just to get our hands and minds and bodies kind of connected on a page. So with any pencil or pen that you're interested in, go and you can see what I'm doing, but I think mostly you can just follow along through kind of listening and exploring. With the paper, I have a small note card for like these warm-ups or just some scratch paper to kind of produce and throw away. And let me know if audio's low or high or anything. I'll make adjustments. I think I'm going to start by just finding a point on the page, somewhere kind of in the center, maybe circling the pencil there to emphasize it. Think about where I placed it, and then drawing a line from edge to edge through the point. I like to pick a place to start and try to guide the pencil towards that point, letting it wobble if it needs to, pass through it and on to the other side. And as I'll trace back over to revisit what I did with that line to reestablish it there. And I was thinking about the larger content for today's class and using the warm-up to slowly build to a larger kind of grid of a world here. So I'm just going to take from that center point, and as I breathe out, draw a line radiating towards the edge over and over again. So I'll take a breath in, and then just let the pencil track with my hand and my arm and my shoulder out towards the edge of the page. Breathe in again, do a similar angle, creating these wedges within the paper. Tracking my movement with my breath as I connect this morning my body and my eyes through this interface, the pencil and the page. And I'm just going to continue breathing and working my way around. In my case, in relatively even increments, but it's not important. What is important is kind of look and see how your eye and hand are tracking. Are the increments even? Are the lines straight? Probably not. It's pretty hard to draw consistent straight lines, but we can still draw them from place to place and have them feel straight enough to define a direction. In the warm-up, letting myself draw in ways I probably wouldn't on paper, pushing the pencil sometimes, pulling at others, just to feel how it interacts with that paper. That might affect the point, my accuracy. I like to switch hands a little bit to warm up. Do that if you want to. It might be uncomfortable. And hold the pencil in a little bit different way. I'm just going to try to retrace some of those lines. Now I'm using my full arm much more. Partly because it's my less comfortable hand, so I feel awkward. I'm still able to kind of track these lines, let them wobble, use the existing element on the page as a guide for my offhand, so it doesn't have to try to do so much to keep it straight. Feeling how different it gets as I draw towards myself. kind of like a plane and wood or draw knife versus pushing. Finding myself getting a little fast, slow it back down to my breath. And so, making my way around again. Hands are feeling a bit warm. The reason I started with this is it's, a really simple world construction, a bit to something we might be familiar with, and if we impose frame onto this radial pattern, just drawing from one line down to another, across to another. And we're gonna probably end up with a little misalignment here. I've now given the paper some context and could use something like this to begin to craft a one-point perspective. I want to give the ground a little bit more definition. Keep the same radial lines tracking. Maybe I want to add a little object here, just playing with the intersections of my lines on the page and bring some awareness to how the false depth or the simulated depth allows me to see three-dimensional things in this two-dimensional framework. Doing the easy ones just to get my eyes and hands warmed up. Just pushing these back. And knowing I can draw out from that center to coordinate any shape I want in this space. Something like that to get our hands warm. I like to stretch them a little bit and make sure my elbows and arms are engaged here with my body, and that way I won't hopefully smudge quite as much. It tends to happen to me a lot as I get tired. I push my hand across the page, especially when I'm kind of working in a little bit of a twisted format. Hopefully you have a more comfortable setup. And in that idea of perspective, I was thinking about doing a longer form exercise of kind of just drawing something that you can pull as an image in your mind. I think I've spent a lot of time in my life looking at and drawing our vegetables, and I've done an exercise for a long time in student work for drawing a pepper because it's relatively recognizable and also pretty complex in its organic nature. So that, I think, is what I've chosen as my subject, but you can choose anything that you can kind of picture in your mind and maybe take a minute to hold that picture, be it a plant or a leaf or a bird, your hand, flowers, vegetables, some kind of object that you can simulate in that mind's eye space, and then we'll see how our hand can translate that notion to the paper. Bring attention to our technique, as well as the flow of our body and this drawing instrument. So for myself, I think I'll start with a profile very lightly. That's easy to see in my mind. Kind of outer shape, something like a pepper, just feathering it in, taking the time to pay some attention to how this image can help me track a pencil along the page, where I see fast curves, slow curves. And what shape is that pepper? Comes from our history, what shape is the object, and our interface with it, our memory. For me, they're always weird and kind of funny shaped. Spend a lot of time working with organic vegetables. They tend to not follow the rules as much, bend and deform more in their environments, react more to protect themselves. Once I begin to have a bit of a profile lightly feathered in, it gives me a place to start. It's a very two-dimensional way of looking at an object, but also places it and gives us something quickly onto the page to interface with. As I go further, start to work into the space with this profile, thinking about the little cap at the top of the pepper that holds it to the plant. Intrudes on the smoother, fleshy part, this rougher, more vegetable part. And as I interface with my profile, I introduce contours in various directions as a way to extract curvature onto this page. I think where I've introduced continuity and crossover, bring larger shapes with quick strokes, really feel the flow of my hand on the paper to get a little distance from that feathering motion, go a little faster and introduce figure internally. And some strokes won't make sense. I like to do these quicker, faster flowing movements to see how that image comes through fast or through intuition from my mind. See if that matches with what I think it should look like. Start to get some internal forms there to the object. And one thing that really interests me, and just my arbitrary choice here of the subject, is the continuity and variability of the curvature of this. So choosing a way to begin to draw it once I have a picture forming on my page that allows me to express some of the more, in my opinion here, intense parts of a figure like the pepper. And for me, it's that contour. Something else I can pull up in my mind from many times of cutting peppers and cooking with them is that there's always this shape to it, the lobes that work their way around the object, the space. So if you can imagine the three-dimensional slices through the object, it's something you've worked with in that way before, or perhaps it's the curvature along the surface. I like to work in these layers of contours on organic shapes as they change gradually over time. You can imagine that change building from one layer to the next, intensifying it in some areas, pinching or pressing harder, looking for subtle local variations in the image of the pepper, in the image of the object. Working my way up and down. And now that things are starting to flow onto the page, taking time to reconnect with my breath and the lines. I draw from the technique I've established very fluid, smooth reading. Gauging my arm not as a feathering out, but as a tracking of the curves that I can see inside my mind. Flow a little more fluidly as they describe a form, as it emerges something there, not there. And question or become aware of the importance of this object as a representation, since it does not exist. It's in my mind, or as a generator of new ideas, or do I want to take it in new directions, draw the things I can't see. The backside may be different from the front, revealing hidden connections and relationships through a simple technique of curves and contours. It's the language of the drawing. My hand is starting to develop, takes on its own function, its own ability. To create an image. See what you notice. Mine, I feel, is tilted a little bit from the real representation. That's okay. Just keep tracking it along, following the curves and the bumps as we approach the boundaries I've set up through my profiles. And now that I've worked through a language of the drawing, it's an opportunity to leave the image behind and find new things within the page, starting from an imagined subject and moving into a reimagined territory that expands the object to see anew what our hand has created. I'm going to pick up a different instrument, a pen here, just so I can have some contrast to this, begin to play from these contours, picking a point where I like the shape of the line, but instead of going around, following the shape, building from the shape as it goes out from what I've learned about the subject. Continuing my way of seeing through the contours, the pinches, concave and convex undulations, seeing what I might not have thought of or noticed about an object that we interface with through our hands when it is now abstracted onto a page. as I work my way out, just letting my hands speak to the page. It would even be a good time to draw with the eyes closed, to know the kind of language that's developing, and take that somewhat brave step into seeing where it will go. I think for me, in this drawing, that's an opportunity to use this more stark language that has come from the pen, as I'm getting more familiar with it here, and go back to a pencil, see how they might come together in this new space. Just get a pencil. And my arm knows now some of the language that's been happening. Maybe it's time to go back inside and not rely so much on my eyes. Just pick a place to begin. See if I can follow that language with eye closed. You might need to open your eyes to retract the beginning point. That may not be important. Just feeling that downward, upward, pinch, and flow motion that I've established. Whatever motion that your body's engaging in to draw, letting that be the guide, flow here. This helps me feel more engaged in the page. Engaged with my arm, and I made a pass with something I have less visual control over. I should start to get probably a lot of interference, overlap, drift, or strange mismatched relationships. And those are things I find as good starting points to just let us take 5 minutes and draw into whatever has emerged on our page. Maybe it's a time to add more layering, or to find new shapes, to add shading, some definition, to start to decide how these misalignments of translations can be something new. So wherever you are, take the next 5 minutes and just draw into the space you've created on the page, bringing attention to your posture, and breathe. As we begin to approach the end of the time here, I hope that hands and eyes and mind have started to find something new in this space of drawing, to draw something out from that connection we have to the page. And maybe if it's something starting to be interesting, you have some time to spend a little bit more attention with it, or pick it up another day with fresh eyes and see where it might lead as a creative act. But if not, we don't have to put too much into the importance of a quick exercise that just connects us with our creative potential and allows us some free space to engage with the page. Thank you all very much for joining. Hope everyone has a good Wednesday, and please come again if you enjoyed it. Tell your friends. It's a good time. I like where this one's going, so I think I'm going to spend a little more time, see what I can discover out of it. The space of overlap here, where two things want to be different, and they have to find their language to be one. Maybe one, because of the heaviness of the pen, becomes very subordinate or dominant in this case, and the other, the fluidity, the flexibility of that pencil to have just a bit softer interaction, can choose to merge or guide with the pen, or to cross it as an act of rebellion, as an act of integration, of discovery. Here I start to get these wisps, waves that you haven't yet learned how to complete, continuity, and local disjunctions. This kind of multi-layer veining, where I've given it a pinch, it starts to have a flow, but that flow can diverge, bifurcate, and split in this world. We all have our histories, backgrounds that provide a unique reading into something. So for me, the reading of an architect or designer, I start to see these as landscapes, as things with potential thickness or territory to be explored. Maybe they're veins, valleys, mountain, or the roofs of a very organic building that's flowing along a spine, or some structural support, but still has that ability to twist, bend, and flex, very much like our own. This is a fun. Make these major leaps that have to bind with the contours, establish themselves. And this can flow into there. Now something's starting to come, crop us into this new place, but be reminded where it began. This pepper here. And I think it's an opportunity to get in and do some finer areas. Start to think about how these little zones might take on more depth, more direction. These areas, they kind of bubble up. They have that same lobe-like quality. to the pepper. And maybe they can go in multiple directions, creating peaks, valleys, pinches, bulges. As I'm continuing to learn the language, I work back and forth, often over the same curves, but I find that getting less and less about trying to find something, more and more a practice of thickening, of loosening the line. It's not in the precision of it that I'm interested, but in the featheriness. As we work our way back into that space of our progenitor, that original pepper form, here, dense and complex. Feeling form emerging, getting much faster. Strokes, as we know what they are, finding places that take on different qualities here, the whole deep depression. Something that has forced its way into another direction, just again, technique of contour, seeing through these layers, defining new profiles, and disrupting them by connecting them across boundaries. To where eventually we don't have to see the outlines. Maybe even this strong, stark pen lines can start to vanish into the space of the drawing. You draw through and up deep. Thank you.